We are going to build a covered tent structure to put my 14 by 16 foot wall tent by Capital Canvas. The tent has a 9-foot ridge pole, 2 windows, and a door on either side.
Oh, hi!
This will serve almost like a bunkie or its own smaller cabin for guests. It'll be heated with a large wood stove and will eventually have beds, countertops, and even running water powered by a small water tower I mount in an adjacent tree. Now, we are building this on a remote water access property, which is about a 20-kilometer boat ride after a long drive to the closest town. Well, it is 6 a.m. on the dot, and I'm in the boat, and I'm not going fishing. I am heading back to the boat launch, back into the tundra. I'm going to hook up the trailer and I'm going to drive to Timber Mart in Thessalon. Bit of a drive, but here we are, Timber Mart. Hopefully my trailer holds everything and I don't have to get a delivery or make another trip. What are we at now? All loaded up. A lot of lumber. Okay, so here we are at Fluke's Timber Mart in Thessalon, and I got all the nails, all the screws, everything I need. Drove around to each different warehouse building, loaded them all into the trailer, and fortunately it all fit, which is awesome. They had everything I needed here. I needed 1x6s, 2x4s, 6x6s, 4x4s, roofing material, plywood, some caulking, some stuff to do with setting up the wood stoves. Anyways, time to go. Sometimes when working in these remote locations on a budget, you have to make do with what you have rather than making another trip to town and spending a whole bunch more money. We also had a limited power supply, and the only power tool we had is an old circular saw. We run the power tool off of a large battery that we keep charged with solar panels and sometimes a generator. So most of our sawing and nailing would be done by hand. The toughest part about building this is building the foundation and making sure it's level. After we decided on the perfect spot to build the structure, we had to start digging. Not an easy feat in the Canadian Shield forest, where rocks are constant and a significant number of roots need to be negotiated before you can actually get into the soil. Fortunately, where we are working, once you get through the overburden, the soil is pretty sandy, which is great for building foundations. After quite a bit of digging and picking, it was time to put in the footings. These are concrete deck footings. Nothing fancy, but will do the job just fine. We tested how flat the footings were by using a level before proceeding. So after getting these footings leveled, we started building the deck. We built the deck in 4 different pieces, and then we screwed it all together, which would double up the joists across the middle each way. To level it, we used some slats under the middle footing and then used 4x4s along the front, lifting the structure up till it was level and then securing the 4x4s to the frame using hammer, nail, and screws. Well, using nails for the majority of this because that way we don't have to keep recharging our drill batteries, but also, come on, nails, that's kind of old school. That's the original off-grid way. That's how my dad and my grandfather built our initial cottage or cabin, why I got all into this. So I'm not going to go away from what works. We then block the 4x4s under the frame itself to provide support directly from the port down to the footings.
And after we're done putting all the legs, I'm going to put a 2x4 block in here and drill it into there. And that'll give some direct support under the 2x6 so it's not just held up by screws.
Because this porch would eventually be covered to keep it dry. And because the soil is nice and sandy, we actually supported some of these 4x4 floor joist supports directly into the sandy soil after removing the overburden. Overall, the structure was very strong, level and square. After all the deck frames were put together, leveled and squared off, Tori took on the tough task of nailing in all the floorboards.
Yes! First floorboard is on.
We used 1x6s of PT at 8 feet long each, which perfectly covered the 16-foot wide structure. The next step is adding our 6x6 pillars. Now we were able to secure the pillars more or less on top of the same footings as the rest of the deck. But for the front pillars, we actually had to add new footings. Fortunately, the area we were working with is relatively flat and we didn't need to make the footings much taller than they were. However, on one side, I used a footing with a cinder block on top where the ground dips, just to bring it up to the same height as the others. And I used spike nails to secure the pillars to the deck frame, hammering a couple in from the inside and then one big one in from the outside through the pillar. But these pillars are going to be what supports the roof. After hammering these pillars in to add additional support, I cut braces at about a 45-degree angle and screwed and nailed them in on the sides of the pillars and to the sides of the deck itself. Whoa!
Ah!
Just kidding.
The next thing we had to do was create a frame around the top of the pillars which would support the roof. I planned on using sandwich 2x6s for this. I used two 2x6x16s on the front and two 2x6x16s on the back, which I stuck together first using glue and screws. On the sides of all three pillars on each side, I hung a single 2x6, again supporting it with 2x6s that I affixed vertically to the sides of the pillars. After I had the 6x6s properly secured around the top of the pillars in order to support the roof, I added frames at both the front and the back to give those long 16-foot spans of 2x6s some extra support. Giving these extra support by cutting supports at 45-degree angles, which I screw to the bottom of those outer 2x6s on the roof frame and back into the pillar itself. This gave me doubled up 2x6s all around on the roof frame and a lot of support to hold the heavy snow loads that we get in Ontario's Algoma region. I used 4x4s, which I supported at the front on top of the floor joists, and then I framed those in with 2x4s to give a sturdy frame which would ultimately help support the ridge pole. At the back of the structure, we decided to use blocks and build it out a little bit further. That way, we wouldn't have to rip an additional floorboard. It could just fit right in. And we built additional footings underneath that, which would help support the vertical 4x4s for the frame we'd build at the back, because they needed to overhang the structure by about an inch. We hadn't really planned that out exactly, but we came up with a solution that looked intentional and was very solid.
So you can see here what I did with these footings, and that way we'll have room to fit up a 16-foot tent.
After putting those 45-degree angle supports on the side 2x6s that would be the roof frame, I went ahead and added them at all the other corners, including at the upper edges on the outside of the door frames that we built underneath the 16-foot span of 2x6s, which are the front and the back of the roof support pieces. Next, we would build posts on top of the roof frame at both the front and the back. The posts would sit in the middle of the door frames we built, and this would eventually support the ridge pole at the peak of our roof. To do this, again we sandwiched lengths of 2x6s, leaving the 2x6 in the front or the back a little bit longer than the 3 preceding it. 2 of those 2x6s would sit directly on top of the 2x6s, which were sandwiched to build the roof frame below. Then the one on the inside and the one on the outside would be secured down to the 2x6 at the frame, as well as right into the 4x4 frame. It took some figuring, but soon we had those in place, and we braced them with additional lengths of 4x4s. We braced each of those pillars on both the front and back with 2 lengths of 4x4 on either side.
A little bit higher on the top.
Next, we needed to hang up our ridge pole. We create a ridge pole made of built up 2x12s. We'd use 8 and 7 foot lengths, gluing them and then nailing them together using 3 nails every 16 inches on both sides. In the end, we had a really sturdy ridge pole. Now for the hard part. The next step is building the roof and getting that ridge pole up on top of the pillars that we just built. And getting that ridge pole up on top of the pillars is probably the most dangerous and physically challenging aspect of this whole adventure. So Tori and I tackled this strategically. Using 2 ladders, I placed one end of the ridge pole up on the roof frame, then I got the other end up on the roof frame. Finally, holding the ridge pole on my shoulder, I climbed up the ladder and placed one end another step up on top of the pillar we just installed. Then Tori and I switched positions. She worked to hold that one end of the ridge pole in place on the pillar as I climbed the other side up and got it on the pillar at the other end of the structure. Now we hammered a couple nails in place and it was in position. We affixed it by using 4 large spike nails and then using 5-inch screws to screw it all in along the edges. It was in place solidly and was not going anywhere. Now it's time to put the rafters in place. And this requires one of the most mathematically challenging aspects of the whole build in terms of carpentry skill. A bird's mouth is essentially a notch that lies at the bottom of the roof rafter, which is the top diagonal piece on either side of what will become a truss when it's all completed. Fortunately, Tori is a little bit better at this than me.
frog. Nailed it. Good catch, bud. Awesome catch. Hi, froggy.
After some time and a little practice, she was able to calculate where these birds' mouths should go on the roof rafters and at what angle they should be cut.
To figure out the birds' mouths, I calculated the pitch of the roof by measuring the rise and run from where the rafters would sit. I then asked ChatGPT to calculate the birds' mouths based on that information. Once I had the birds' mouths figured out, I just used that as a template to cut the rest of them, and then I proceeded to cut 30 more birds' mouths by hand. 2, 4, 6, 8, 11 to go.
We'd also need to create diagonal cuts at the top of each roof rafter as well, where they'd meet on top of the ridgepole.
So 2 1/4 is halfway between these 3 2-bys, right? That means if we just draw a line straight up.
We decided to have the rafters meet on top of the ridgepole as opposed to screwing them into the side of the ridgepole, because this is actually stronger. So we need to cut diagonal cuts at the end of those rafters and then cut a bird's mouth at the other end, having them all line up perfectly so they could be screwed in from the inside of the roof's frame as well as screwed together where they meet at the top above the ridgepole. I also respectively screwed each roof rafter down into the top of the ridgepole to create solid support.
So that's a big old screw. I think that's a 5.5 inch screw. Anyways, these go from the inside here through to the bird's mouth on the roof truss we just laid in.
When we finished installing the rafters, I then had to build a bit of an overhang at the gables. The gabled ends are the ends of the roof at the front and back. To create this, I sandwiched 2 pieces of 2x6s together and affixed them to the side of the structure using a 4x4 to brace it. I did that at all 4 corners, and then essentially I extended the ridge pole by cutting a piece of 2x6, which I cut to be the same width of the roof pole, and secured it to the top of the ridge pole, allowing it to stick out from the structure by about 6 inches. Then I added a rafter to this overhang piece at both the front and the back. Now I had to affix collar ties. Collar ties create a lot of strength in the roof and distribute the weight of a snow load. This was a challenging job, and Tori was busy with some other stuff that day, which meant I had to go about it alone. Measuring the right angle to cut each one and then standing on the ladder and screwing them in was fairly challenging and tedious, but I stayed on it, and before too long I got all of the collar ties installed. Now that the roof was done, I added battens, or essentially blocks, in between all the 2x4 rafters, which gave the roof a lot more strength and support. Finally, the bones to our entire structure were finished. Wow, what an awesome sight. It was starting to look really good, but we still had a lot more work cut out for us. Now the next step is covering that roof, and this ended up being a larger job than we'd anticipated, although it was fairly straightforward. First is just sheeting the roof, and that is just covering it with plywood. This actually added a lot of support to the whole structure, and after we'd put all this plywood on the roof, it barely budged when I shook it as hard as I could. We used spruce 5/8-inch tongue and groove plywood, putting the larger pieces on first and squaring them up as best we could. After that, we had to fill in the area around the bottom and at the front with ripped pieces of plywood. Well, we got all the roof slats on, which is great. Then I took a lunch break and a wasp flew into my drink and stung me on the inside of the lip, which is not so great, and it really, really hurts, and apparently I look really funny. What do you think, Tar?
Not funny, it's very serious.
So I'm gonna tough it out and continue working, but that is really swollen. What we did is we essentially pulled the large pieces of plywood up on top of the ones we'd already screwed into place, overhung them a little bit, and then went underneath and marked them in between the roof rafters with a pencil. And that gave us a nice straight line for us to cut. This is where we got good use out of a circular saw. Marking these pieces worked out great, and we found that it was pretty challenging to fit the tongue and groove together. But with a little elbow grease, we got that done too. Just doing this was a full day's worth of work. The next day, we covered the plywood in weather sheeting, and it looked like it was about to start raining all day. We even got a little bit of drizzle, but we managed to get the whole roof covered in the weather sheeting, which kept everything underneath dry. So that meant it was the perfect time to finally set up our tent. What an awesome tent we found. We had a full metal poles in this 14 by 16 foot canvas wall tent by Capital Canvas, a Canadian manufacturer out of BC. And setting it up was pretty straightforward too. We first started by setting up the entire roof and putting in the rafters. We then put the tent cover over it and then added the legs in one by one. With 5-foot walls and a 9-foot ridgepole, there's ample room to move around.
You're not going to be able to get it.
I don't think you'll be able to reach.
I can't do it. It's too tough.
What a cool sight to see the structure with a tent finally set up in it. We loved it. The next morning, the rain had stopped and we brought the kids out to check it out. There's a great window on either side, which is covered with mosquito netting, and we opened those up. Hudson just loved them. There's a front and a back door. The front door is your standard rectangular shape, just like a typical door to a house. The back has a standard wall tent door, more or less a flap, that can also be open wide and tied back. Pretty awesome, and with the roof on top, it really felt secure.
Yeah!
But our work was far from over. The last thing we had to do to get this thing done is the shingling. Now, Tori and I had never done any shingling before outside of some basic work. But fortunately, the instructions come on the PAX shingles. So we read through those carefully and figured it out pretty easily. We essentially broke the shingle tabs off and put the back side of each slab of shingles one after the other around the edges, making sure that the tar lines met up on the corners. Then we began shingling, starting from the left and working to the right. To make sure that the first layer of shingles was lined up properly, we snapped a chalk line across the roof on either side.
Okay.
After the first chalk line worked as a perfect guide, we could eyeball the rest of them out along the way and forego using the chalk line because this is not a massive roof with complicated twists and bends in it. And you continue like this until you get to the ridgepole.
Well, Tori is doing her last row here, and we're going to leave this top on and fold it over, and we do the end cap. All right, climb up and pass it to me, bud. Thank you. Good work, Huddy.
So after this, the last step is putting on the ridge cap of the shingles, and a few ways you can do that, but we're just kind of keeping it simple here. Doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work really well. To create the cap at the top of the ridgepole, single shingle tabs need to be cut with the non-colored back part behind them. They need to be laid down and hammered in place with one overlapping the other. We set ours up with the open flap side away from where the predominant winds would hit our structure. As you work your way down, hammering these in, the final shingle goes on top. And on this one, 4 roofing nails need to be put into the outside. And putting down that last shingle on the cap of our structure was the final nail in the building. We were finished.
All right, yeah! We did it!
It's done. Good job. What a project. It felt great to be able to work on this project together, and it was a lot of fun. There's something really satisfying about working with your hands and completing a challenging project that isn't out of your grasp. It'll also be a great addition to our camp because our cabin is relatively small. Having any more guests other than 2 up gets pretty cramped. Well, this is now a great 4-season option for them to stay, and I'm looking forward to finishing off the inside, building a bed, a couch, a countertop, and putting in a big, robust wood stove to keep this thing nice and warm during the cold winter months. And it was also great for our kids, Hudson and Wesley, who got to watch us build it and be part of the build in a few different spots. Hudson helped by beating in nails, by standing on boards as we cut them, and even tried doing a little sawing by himself. What an awesome project, and we're really happy with the way it turned out.